She didn't crouch, she stood up tall. Tracy Crouch, the Conservative minister, honourable member of Parliament, has walked from the government in protest at the backsliding on the banning of the crack cocaine of the gambling industry. Full marks to Tracy Crouch, I say, and I'm one of those following the lead of Mark Zarb-Cousin, who has been campaigning for this issue and other anti-gambling measures to be taken. But this story is significant not just in itself, because suddenly, scrummaging around Tracy Crouch are the pro-Brexit ministers in the government. They're all out there tweeting and speaking, giving interviews and fulsome tributes to a lady, honourable though she is, who was hitherto scarcely known in the country. Is this a new schism opening up in the Conservative Party? And what about the new schism that opened up in the Labour Party? In the budget votes this week, 20 Blairite, Brownite Labour members of Parliament, whose common denominator was their hostility to Jeremy Corbyn, suddenly found themselves desperate to demonstrate their left-wing credentials. They denounced the hitherto denounced Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, whom we're forever told are ultra-leftists, for being far too moderate on the budget proposals over tax cuts. And so, 20 of them. Don't bother looking them up. You could guess. All the usual suspects were in the lobby, breaking a 3-line Labour whip. Is this a harbinger of another storm to come? And just when you thought that Halloween was past, who is that? Hark at that lurching figure, that living zombie, lurching out of the undergrowth, out of his garden shed, to make a comeback. It's David Cameron. I kid you not. According to Tom Newton-Dunn, who knows what he's talking about, at least when it comes to matters conservative, revealed to the world that David Cameron is bored, and consider this bleeped, bored, doot, and he wants to come back, not just as a lowly member of Parliament, but to come back as our Foreign Secretary, no less. Now, we thought he'd retired for good. We thought he'd taken up, farming, dairy farm or a pig farm or something. We thought he had retired to the countryside, but no. He's now so bored he wants to come back to politics. What do you think about that idea? Here's what I think, because I'll be fair and balanced. I'm being balanced by a young man who totally loves David Cameron, and therefore I'm now free to say what I think. I think David Cameron was the worst Prime Minister of my lifetime, and arguably, as Owen Jones in The Guardian put it very well, he may be the worst British Prime Minister since Lord North, whose Prime Ministership was forever remembered as the man who lost the American colonies and thus changed the course of the world for the worse. Because David Cameron didn't just lose a colony, he arguably lost Britain, because Britain is closer today to actual breakup, existential breakup, than it has ever been. David Cameron will not be able to walk 10 yards in public without his legacy of a ham-fisted Brexit as his legacy. But chutzpah, you can't say he doesn't have. He has announced that he wants to return to the ship of state in the very senior position, or at least it once was, as British Foreign Secretary. Tell me what you think about this. Now, never mind Halloween. You're getting ready for Guy Fawkes Night. I hate Guy Fawkes Night. And not just for the reasons I adumbrated last week, that I don't like replicas of gunfire and explosives, because I've seen the results of gunfire and explosives too close at hand. I've even been amongst it. I've been bombed. I've been shot at. Believe me, when you have the sound of a penny banger, or a barking doggy, or a rocket, even a Roman candle isn't so pleasant. I mentioned Roman candle last because actually that's what Guy Fawkes Night is all about. Did you know that, dear listener? That the guy on the top of the bonfire is on top of the bonfire because he's Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes, who entered Parliament with the intentions of blowing it sky high. Why? Because Britain at the time in 1605 was in the grip of anti-Roman Catholic terror. Yes, terror. Nuns were being hanged. Priests were being executed. Catholics had taken to the woods in order to celebrate Mass, in order to indulge in their plenary obligations. Catholics were witch-hunted, and Guy Fawkes was burned. He was burned to death, and that's what we have been commemorating. I've just been looking at the origins of the Lewes, L-E-W-E-S, am I pronouncing it correctly? Lewes, down on the south coast. They're famous now because they burn an effigy of somebody every year. Donald Trump, I think it was, quite recently. Who knows? Maybe even David Cameron made it on top of their pyre. But the origin of the Lewes bonfire was to burn effigies of the Pope. The Reverend Ian Paisley even visited Lewes precisely to celebrate with them the burning of effigies of the Pope. So, I just ask you this. If Guy Fawkes was Jewish or Muslim, would we be celebrating the inferno in which he met his fate? Would we be so sanguine about the endless affronts to other faiths as we are about us Roman candles, as we're called? I mention that because a new campaign had just been launched in Scotland called Call It Out, to draw attention to the ongoing, and it's been going all of my life, discrimination against Catholics and people of Irish descent like me in my country of Scotland. They had just launched it when Neil Lennon again fell victim to a brutal assault. In fact, he's been assaulted subsequent to the assault I refer to, when he was hit in the head with a coin and felled at a football match. It's now revealed that as he was going into the ground, there was an effigy of Neil Lennon with a rope around his neck, hanging. Now, I wrote a book about all of this. I'm not plugging it, by the way, Matthew, because it's sold out. You can't get it for love nor money. But it was about Neil Lennon's year of living dangerously, when he was the manager of Celtic, when he was receiving bullets, live bullets in the post, when his wife was cowering in the family home, her hand just inches from a panic button which would have brought Strathclyde Constabulary's finest as slowly as possible to the house to rescue her. The treatment of Neil Lennon as an Irish Roman Catholic in Scotland is Scotland's shame. But burning Guy Fawkes on the 5th of November every year in the rest of the country isn't all that much different in concept. We'll be talking about Donald Trump's caravan. No, he's not done a Margaret Beckett and gone for a holiday in a caravan. No, it's the caravan. On its way, he said, with the intention of thousands of Johnny foreigners entering the United States, a country which, of course, consists almost entirely of Johnny foreigners, a country based on immigration. They didn't come in caravans, but they came in teeming ships. Some of them came in slave ships. It's an odd time for the United States to discover a hatred and fear of foreigners. At least that's what Donald Trump hopes. And you know what? I think he might be right. I think he might be right, and this might be a piece of electoral wizardry, because he has changed the entire narrative of the American elections to one of America under siege by Johnny Foreigner. Never mind the fact the US has got literally hundreds of military bases all around the world. Never mind the fact that the United States overthrew the president of Honduras, introducing instability which has led to the emergence of this caravan. Never mind the fact that the United States has interfered in the internal affairs of all of Latin America ever since the Monroe Doctrine declared it to be America's backyard. Never mind any of that. And it might just be that the Liberals and the Democrats have walked into Donald Trump's trap. Because if you don't have borders, you're not a state at all. A state has to have borders. Otherwise it isn't a state. And if you have borders, what are you saying, Mr. Democrat? That 5,000, 50,000, 500,000, 5 million, 50 million can just turn up at your border and walk across it? That's Trump's pitch, and he's hoping very much that it will succeed. We'll also be talking in this season of ghouls about universal credit, a change in Britain's welfare laws which some say is actually going to kill people. It's the mother of all talk shows, with me, George Galloway, only on Talk Radio. Come on, baby, light my fire. It's not that I'm against fires. And you can even build a fire on the 5th of November or any other time that you like. But don't forget that what you're actually commemorating is the incineration of a man who was acting in the midst of anti-Catholic terror in England. And I just don't think we should be perpetuating that sort of thing. I know that you wouldn't if it wasn't any other religion. I know that you wouldn't if Guy Fawkes was a Muslim or if he was a Jew. Now, just a slight rearrangement of the order because of some difficulty with telephone lines. I'm going to come sooner rather than later to my old friend, the crowd-funded economist, and I'm one of those crowd-funding him. I'm a proud patron of his Patreon page, Professor Steve Keen, who's going to give us a kind of impartial guide of universal credit, a subject that we hear about, read about, see mentioned everywhere, but about which most people, unless they are on benefits and in receipt of the new benefit, which is 6 benefits rolled into one, unless they are on those benefits, most people don't know the details at all. But there's nothing about money that Professor Steve Keen doesn't know. The crowd-funded economist is with us now. Steve, thanks very much for joining us.
Good to be with you, George, as always.
And particularly out of order, as it were, because you weren't expecting to be on quite so swiftly. Let me set the scene. Ian Duncan Smith, we can mention him because it's Halloween. Ian Duncan Smith, the erstwhile secretary for the various welfare departments, DWP as it's known now, he introduced, this was his baby, wasn't it? And he says that this will simplify the benefits system, save money for the state, billions is the sum mentioned, and that it will not disadvantage the poorest and most vulnerable people in our society. Have they got a point, Steve?
The actual idea of a universal credit can have that sort of effect, George, but the trouble is these things are always implemented by people who of the type that I once saw satirised in Punch magazine as the judges were talking about whether they would increase the fares on the railway. Sitting in the back of the Rolls-Royce, they said, so we agreed then, they should pay more for their trains.
Yeah.
And universal credit had exactly the same impact. It's the sort of thing which could simplify the system from the point of view of the recipient of welfare, but in fact it's normally used by these Tory types, and that's the only way I can describe them, because exactly the same thing was done in Australia. It's done to punish those on welfare rather than provide to them. Punish
them by taking money out of their pockets, or making it more difficult to qualify, or both?
Well, one of the simplest way they make it too difficult is they give you waiting periods. So they say, for example, I think in the universal credits case, you have to wait 5 weeks for the first payment. In Australia, they said you've got to, if you become unemployed and it's if they see it in any sense voluntary, then the first payment comes 6 months after you become unemployed. Now, people, if you're a multi-millionaire, 6 months without income is not a problem. If you're a typical person who's working in an unskilled labouring job or anything of that description, 6 months without income, you're either committing crimes or you're dead. And,
yeah, I mean, who could live for 6 months without money?
Most people can't. When you take a look at when surveys are done of the extent to which people have buffers in case income declines, most people haven't got enough. The majority, we're talking 70% of the population, couldn't go 3 weeks, let alone 5 weeks, which apparently is the standard waiting period when you're on universal credit. So it's done to punish, and it's done by people who have no real personal perception of what it's like not to have a cash flow.
A minister was asked at the weekend on one of the sofa shows if it were true that some families would be £200 a month worse off with this universal credit. The answer from the minister was, I hope not. That was a bit hit and miss, I thought. When you're living up to your mouth in water, it takes but a ripple to drown you.
And that's the trouble. As well as bringing it in, initially when it was first brought in, it was funded in such a way that it appeared that anybody who went on the universal credit would be no worse off than they were under the 6 different schemes that are being amalgamated into it. But of course, with the emphasis upon austerity, there's a big large number. You're not there spending it. Let's cut that big large number before we implement it and make savings on the cost of welfare. And this, again, the whole focus on austerity means that what was already just going to replace what existed came out as giving you less than what existed. And of course, the other side of things, the implementation, the computerisation of it has been, by the looks of it, a complete disaster.
Yeah, tell me about that, because that's an additional factor here. I mean, it may end up actually not saving the government any money, mightn't it?
Yes, it quite possibly could do that. I'm a database professional, George. In my past life, I used to design databases, and I'm building a database analysis program right now. So I know a fair bit about what one does and what one doesn't do when you design databases. The trouble is the people who make the decisions to buy this stuff wouldn't know a database if it mugged them on this corner of the street. And they go for all the glossy sales stuff, and they don't understand the complexity of tying one of these systems together. So they get a budget, and if you work in computing, there's called the N+1 rule. If somebody says something's going to take 2 weeks, you estimate it'll take 3 months. If they say 1 year, make it 2 decades. And unfortunately, not being aware of these blowouts that occur in trying to bring computer systems together, they go for the gloss. And then, of course, the cost of doing it is actually, in some cases, 10 times, 12 times as high as they think it was going to be.
Now, the minister has moved on, of course. Ian Duncan Smith has moved on. The government was under some pressure to halt the rollout of universal credit. The opposition sought to make a battle over that in the budget debate. The Shadow Chancellor said that he was trying to get all the parties, including the pivotal Ulster Unionists, to vote against the continued rollout as a condition of passing the budget. But it kind of fizzled out. So are we now stuck with universal credit? And when will it be fully in operation? How many people will it affect, do you think?
I think we're going to be seeing it splattered all over the front page of the newspapers, because when these things are rolled out without sufficient testing and without looking at the impact on people who's suddenly going to find themselves without a cash flow, you get effectively rioting coming out of this, spread all over the country, where people are currently getting benefits which will terminate and not be restored in time for them to have any income whatsoever. They'll be turning up at food banks. They'll be turning up breaking your windows in some cases as well. So that's what I expect. You should not bring out these things without it. You should have an overlap. You should not have a transition. And by the looks of it, they're going for a transition, and for almost certainly the transition will fail. And then we'll have all hell to pay for the first 6 weeks to 12 weeks of the process. The poor will suffer most, and the government might lose a few points in the popularity polls.
Some people have said this could be Theresa May's poll tax moment. Is that a bit extreme as a comparison?
No, I think that's pretty fair. I think if you had to say what's going to be the defining feature of Theresa May's prime ministership, it's repeating the mistakes of Margaret Thatcher without the savoir-faire and without the personality.
Well, that's pretty damning. You can say that. I couldn't possibly comment. Professor Steve Keen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Theresa May is Margaret Thatcher without the savoir-faire and the personality, according to the good professor, who's very much worth following, I should say, on his Patreon page. Anyway, I omitted to tell you the number, though regular listeners know it off by heart. It's 0344 499 1000. That's 0344 499 1000. And here's how it works. You call us. We take your number, your name, what you want to talk about, and we call you back, so it needn't cost you more than a penny or two. Have your say on the issues I've been raising tonight. You can also email me via the website at talkradio.co.uk. You can text the word talk followed by your message to 87222, but that will cost you 25p plus normal charges. You can tweet me at George Galloway at Talk Radio. It's the mother of all talk shows. Now, I told you earlier about Donald Trump. He's not as daft as he looks, not as daft as he sounds. He has transformed these later stages of the midterm election campaigns, which come to their conclusion on Tuesday, and when the House and the Senate might or might not change hands, might put into place, and this is a bit of a long shot, but might put into place a sufficient Democratic majority to begin the process of impeaching Donald Trump for sundry misdemeanours, one of which I've no doubt would be prayed in aid, is his dispatching of thousands of heavily armed and very expensive American army personnel to the southern border with Mexico. The proximate cause of that is that what has become known as a caravan of poor Latin American immigrants, although Trump has alleged without a scintilla of evidence, that amongst their number are Middle Easterners, as he put it, Middle Easterners, and implied, indeed explicitly stated on one occasion, at least, that amongst their number might be ISIS personnel, though it would seem an odd way for ISIS to try and enter the United States in a caravan that the entire world's media is now covering. He has sent the soldiers to the border with orders to open fire if the caravanists start to throw stones. You may be familiar with that military order of battle. Now, on one level, it is positively perverse. After all, the United States was created, built by the mass influx of millions and millions of immigrants. When did they start turning away the poor, huddled masses yearning to be free? And shouldn't they cover up that inscription on the Statue of Liberty now? Given that the United States was built on the annihilation of scores of millions of the Native Americans that were there before the Europeans arrived, given that it was further built on millions of enchained African slaves, why are they all getting so worked up about a caravan of a few thousand Latin American refugees headed for their border? But, don't discount this, because I know most of you listening to me are of a liberal turn of mind. Don't discount the fact that as a look over their strategy, this may turn out to have been a very smart move by Donald Trump. Because what he's saying is, well, we have borders, we've got to defend them. And if we allow 5,000 just to walk across, why won't it be 500,000 next time? We're trying to get Lee Stranahan, who's a US investigative reporter and who thinks that Trump is acting smartly, as our next guest. But while we try to reach him, let me take a first call from Shirley in Birmingham. Go ahead, Shirley.
Oh, hi, George.
Hi.
I was speaking about universal credit. If it comes through, it will probably do for the government. It'll bring them down because what's happening of this rolling of 6 benefits into one, it's become an abolition of any sickness benefit. Like I'll give you an example. If you're unemployed and you're outside of London, because London you get a bit more money. If you're outside of London, unemployed, say you're here in Birmingham, you get £70. If you're sick, you'll get £90 plus. It might be £90, £100. So you get that little bit extra. With universal credit, if you go to the job centre and you're unemployed, healthy, you'll get £70. If you go to the job centre and you're unemployed sick, you'll get the same £70. The exact same. There's no provision whatsoever for anybody who's ill or disabled.
So you're saying there's no flexibility in it?
No, that's exactly, because the way the old system works was you had unemployment benefit and then you had sickness benefit. And the way sickness benefit compared to unemployment benefit was sickness benefit was paid at a slightly higher rate. So if you've no job and you're unemployed, you got £70. If you were sick and unemployed, it was anything from 95
No, I get that. But how will that bring the government down would be my question.
Because when you go to the job centre and you say, I've got stage 3 cancer, all you've got is 70 quid. And not only
I'm not arguing it's not. I'm not arguing it's not cruel, Shirley. What I'm saying is, it's a problem that will be suffered by a minority of people, quite a few of whom traditionally don't vote. I'm just asking you why you think, what would be the mechanism by which it would bring the government down?
I don't think that people who are sick are the minority. I think it's a chunk of people. Also, at the moment, if you're healthy and you've got a sick child, you get carer's allowance, but that seems to be abolished. So if you're looking after somebody sick, there's nothing for you. Then there's another aspect to the abolition of sickness benefit. I mean, just think of it. There's no sickness or disability benefit anymore. That's got to be perverse. So that's one saga. The other saga is the rent. At the moment, you get your rent from the local authority, the council. So I'm in Birmingham. If you get £100 a week rent, that's your charge. You get the full £100 because you're unemployed from the council. Well, they've handed the rent payments to the job centre. This is universal credit.
Yep.
So your rent will be paid through the job centre.
And it'll be delayed, and so you'll be in arrears?
Yeah, but not only that, the thing is the rules are different. If you get your rent from the council and it's £100, you'll get £100. If your rent is £100 at the job centre, they'll only give you £40 towards it. So you're automatically £60 in arrears. So you've never got full rent coverage. Did you see the perversity of it?
I'm not in any doubt about that. I suppose the government's calculation is that the majority of the country who are not on these benefits won't care enough about the plight of the people you're describing. That's presumably the government's thinking.
Yeah, it might be worth doing a freedom of information, starting with Lewisham Council, because you see here in Birmingham, we've got some people on the old benefits and some people on universal credit. Lewisham London put everybody on universal credit. And what happens with the borough of Lewisham is if you're a single mother, they put you in a tower block, and the tower blocks are £150 a week. Well, the single mothers were given £52 towards the 150. So they were £100 in rent arrears. And I swear, 15,000 babies have been taken into care because the mother has been evicted with rent arrears. And that's worth a freedom of information. It's worth saying to Lewisham, how many babies are in care? We're not being funny, not for abuse, but because mum has been evicted, because mum has switched to universal credit, and universal credit only gives you part of your rent. So if your rent is £120, you'll get 60 quid. So you've only got part of your rent ever. You've never got your full rent. It's put a load of babies in care, thousands.
Well, that's a much more expensive. That's a very expensive way of doing things. It would be much more expensive to put a child in care than to give the mother the money to pay the rent.
And it's going. And this is how. And also, like I'm in Birmingham, and on January the 1st, Birmingham City Council put your rent up. Now, all the rent payments are given to the job centre. Now, we have 100,000 tenants in Birmingham on welfare that they get housing benefit paid through the council. All these jobs, the housing benefit, 100,000 tenants handed to the job centre. How is the job centre on January the 1st going to increase the rent of 100,000 people? So you then end up in rent arrears, you then end up evicted, and that's if you're healthy. What about Birmingham, where we have another 100,000 people in handicapped centres? You know, Down syndrome, blind, cerebral palsy. We have 100,000 people. If you live in a handicapped home, you get your living allowance through housing benefit. That's how you stay in the home. So how is the job centre going to pay out for everybody in a handicapped home? So that's one saga. The council manage it through adult social services. But how is the job centre going to manage turning up at a handicapped home with 50, blind, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome to sort out their rent, that they're not going to get it fully paid? So that's one side. This is what it will do for the government.
Well, as you describe it, it certainly sounds positively nightmarish. Shirley in Birmingham, I'm grateful for your call. It's kicked off what I think might be a spirited debate about this. 0344 499 1000. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. You call us, we'll call you back. You can email me, text me, or tweet me at George Galloway at Talk Radio. Here from my old friend Filza in Ireland. She says, so now Trump is acting exactly like Netanyahu. Kill whoever throws stones. And Raymond Clifford says, the local London radio station switched off. Talk radio back on. Time for the mother of all talk shows. Time for reality and truth. Thank you, Raymond, for that. My old friend Marie McFarlane says, to people who don't care about the treatment of people on benefits, I say this. Most people are one redundancy, one accident, or one sickness away from them. Very powerful point. Ask not for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee and all men. Lizzie, the legend, says, to people who don't care about the treatment of people on benefits, oh no, that's the same one. Marie and Lizzie, great minds think alike. So is this third one. Nobody's sifting these for me. Lizzie says universal credit is killing people. Cuts to services are killing people. Tory ideological austerity is killing people. And Scouse Alarm, my old pal, says to people who don't care about the treatment, no, these are all repeats. Please sift them, I ask my friends through the glass. And Michael says, cold as ice, willing to sacrifice. I don't know what that one means. Michael again says, that's not three coats, it's her thick skin. You really need to sift these because some of these are clearly not for me, nor necessarily appropriate. We've got a new team on through the glass tonight, and that's why there are one or two gremlins in the system. The last caller is absolutely correct about the universal benefit. A lot of stuff coming in on this. Mal says, Trump refers to Honduras migrants fleeing persecution, poverty and violence as an invasion, and that they are bringing violence. He even suggests to his army that, as I said, they open fire if anyone throws stones at them. Dr. Fath, URS, says, George, I now truly believe that the Tories are, through universal credit in particular, deliberately attempting to provoke actual civil unrest in the country. And David Leviscont says, why, oh why, are people so incoherent to the fact that we have all been sold out? That presumably refers to a previous tweet, because I don't know what that means, David. The Communicipalist says universal credit is a misnomer. It should be called universal debit, because impoverished people have again been selected to pay for the opulent lifestyles of others. And Fra says, well, we have a new caravan of indigenous Brazilians. Now the newly elected leader wants to end any special status to the 13 indigenous peoples of Brazil. This a reference to the victory of the far-right candidate, Bolsonaro, to be president of Latin America's most populous country, with a clear pledge to witch hunt his opponents and end any positive discrimination against the indigenous people of the area. I'm still trying to make sense of these. Cool ID, I think. To people who, no, we've done that one. Neil, keep everyone happy. To people, no, these are all the same. Universal credit is nothing more than pure wickedness, making life so intolerable that £8 an hour looks positively luxurious unless you're disabled. And Christina says, well done, Shirley from Birmingham, who gave interesting examples of the consequences of universal credit resulting in rent arrears, homelessness, and children being taken into care. And Mike Graham, is that the Mike Graham? That's not for me. Shouldn't be on my screen. John says, withholding and reducing benefits is the Tory idea of making work pay. And Mary Lindsay, no, that's a repeat Ryan says, I see that faux Liberal Tory Anna Soubry was interviewed over the 2015 general election battle bus overspending. Is this the same Soubry who wants Boris Johnson shanghaied? I think is the meaning of it. Barham says, universal credit is killing people. And X-Ray Vision says, at last, it's the moats. I'm struggling here because my computer feed is a complete unintelligible mass of nonsense, repeat tweets, and so on. I'm also struggling because our guests have not been located. I'm struggling because I'm one of life's strugglers. But it's still the mother of all talk shows. We're talking about David Cameron's return or not to frontline politics. What's your view on that? Some say he should stay on his farm, others in his shed. Others say, come on back if you'd like to have a go. And one of those is Amandeep Singh Bogal, who's a Conservative campaigner and a parliamentary candidate in Upper Bann. How does that work? Upper Bann is in the north of Ireland. There are no Conservatives there. He must be a candidate for something else. Anyway, he totally loves David Cameron, and he's up after the break. As is Lee Stranahan, I hope, the US investigative journalist who backs Trump on the whole caravan affair. Universal credit will continue to run and run. And I'll be talking about anti-Irish Catholic racism, because that's what it is. As Neil Lennon said at his press conference today, after which he was again assaulted, some people call it sectarianism. I call it racism. And it is racism. And if it were being practiced on the scale that it is against any other religion, people of any other ethnicity in Britain, well, let's just say we wouldn't be throwing people onto bonfires, metaphorically speaking, on the 5th of November. Now, Cornelius III says, my, how coincidental that the very day after we hear Banks is being investigated, the news of Labour being investigated for anti-Semitism. Surely not dark forces trying to manage the media agenda. Well, let me deconstruct that a bit, Cornelius. As the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police made clear today, though arguably not clear enough and not quickly enough, Labour is not being investigated by anybody for anti-Semitism. People who claimed that they were Labour are being investigated for some dozens of Facebook and Twitter messages and emails that they sent to people. Labour is not responsible for them. They may not even be members of the Labour Party. But the BBC, the state broadcaster, got the ball rolling early doors, and the local London radio station has been running with it ever since. It's a confection that is 3 months old. It's a non-story, but it's nonetheless dominated the airwaves, which has me wondering if Theresa May can necessarily be relied upon when she said last week that there will be no early general election. Georgie says on the Twitter, absolutely right, most people don't give a monkey's about those of us on benefits and assume we're scrougers. These people will only start to complain or care when they are affected personally by austerity and don't recognise that they are already. Well, everybody's affected by austerity, Georgie. There are people listening to this that haven't had a wage increase. Some of them not at all. Some of them not in real terms in any case. Millions of people have not had a wage increase for 8 years since that nice David Cameron broke off from his embrace of a husky, from his hugging of a hoodie, and introduced austerity as a method in this country. I am not Waldo says, to people who don't care about the treatment of people on benefits, I say this. I've read this 3 times already. Most people are one redundancy, one accident, or one sickness away from needing the benefit system. So good, I said it 3 times. And Scouser Lar says I was waiting for Tamar to come on so I could go and make a cup of tea. Tamar, don't let these critics upset your recovery. Get well soon, my dear, dear friend. Tamar's just doing his duty. We're just trying to keep this show on the road. We're just trying to keep the Open University, well, open. We're just trying to keep the mother of all talk shows afloat. We have many enemies out there that would like to close it down. Now, when I finally get a guest, I have no idea who it's going to be. It could be Amandeep Singh Bogal, the Conservative campaigner and parliamentary candidate for Upper Ban. For which party, please? Who loves David Cameron, on David Cameron's return to politics. It can't be Steve Keen, because we've already had him. I'm hoping it's Lee Stranahan, but apparently it won't be. He's the US investigative reporter who's going to talk us through the Honduras caravan story. And definitely at 9:07 precisely, we'll be talking to Nick Holland, the author of The Real Guy Fawkes, on the 5th of November story I've been trying to interest you in. So far, not much traffic on that. It's a bit like the benefits thing. It's only if you've grown up in Scotland and maybe in Liverpool, where there's a sectarian divide, that you know what sectarianism feels like. Neil Lennon was a football manager in several clubs in England, and nobody gave a toss about his ginger hair, his Catholic faith, and his Irish ethnicity. But in Scotland, my goodness, it's a raging story. And the fact that he got hit by a coin and felled doesn't seem to have created any empathy at all. He brought it on himself, they're saying. He gets hit by a coin, knocked to the ground, in the very place that he was physically assaulted a few years back when he was the manager of Celtic, prompting me to write a book about the affair. But he brought it on himself. You see, he's just not the right kind of Irish Catholic. He doesn't lower his eyes when he's talking to the others. He's proud. He's defiant. He's a Hibernian. He's a Celtic man. And so if you think that burning an effigy of a man who didn't blow up the Houses of Parliament, but was trying to, because Britain was in the grip of anti-Catholic terror on a scale we can scarcely imagine nowadays. If you think throwing guys on a bonfire on the 5th of November makes that problem any less, then I can't imagine what you're thinking about. So, I hope my guests will be up after this. You see what we've done there? Fire by Arthur Brown. Come on, baby, light my fire. We're talking about the 5th of November. Now, Miller's Maniac says, when will the mainstream media take responsibility for helping the far right's cause? They offer the likes of Tommy Robinson coverage for ratings, which in turn gives him free press to millions. Merkel stepping down, the rise of the right. Well, those who say we shouldn't leave the European Union because we'll descend into barbarism are not paying much attention to political trends across the European Union. And those who say that Scotland is some kind of lacune of liberalism, better listen to this from the finest writer in Britain today, John White, up there in Scotland. He says the persecution of Neil Lennon gives lie to the idea that Scotland is some kind of multicultural utopia in comparison to England. Anti-Irish racism in Scotland reminds us that there were no black and tans in Scotland, but there were many Scots in the black and tans. That's John White, who, in an earlier incarnation before he became one of Britain's top writers, helped me write the aforementioned book on Neil Lennon. And Patrick Vidine says, sure, Lennon got hit by a coin, loutish behaviour, but then, like many footballers, he took a dive and went to ground as if hit by a tank. The ref should have sent him off for simulation, I think it's called these days. What a pussy. Patrick, you are a plonker. A total, absolute plonker. The man was hit unexpectedly, out of the blue, by a sharp coin on the side of his head. And he fell down. This is a variant. This is a variant on the he brought it on himself idea. Now, a man who's a parliamentary candidate in Upper Ban probably knows a thing or two about the aforementioned subjects, but that's not what he's here to discuss this evening. He's a Conservative campaigner, and he loves the idea of David Cameron coming back to frontline politics. Amandeep Singh Bogal, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, George. Good evening.
Can you explain this conundrum first? Whose candidate are you in Upper Ban?
I was a Conservative and Unionist candidate in Upper Ban in the 2015 election.
Were you? So the Tories stood in Northern Ireland against
I did, yes.
against the Unionists?
Well, not against the Unionists, but as a Unionist.
Yeah, but I mean, presumably there was an Ulster Unionist in the field.
Yes, Ulster Unionist, Democratic
I
Unionist.
never knew that. You've taught me something already before you've even started properly talking. I'm grateful to you for that. Now, most people's, including Steve Norris, the former Conservative candidate for London Mayor twice, and a former minister in the Conservative government of John Major, said that David Cameron should stay in his shed. But you would welcome him back. Tell us why.
Well, I think, look, we live in a new era of politics where there is constant change. There's absolute constant change. And David Cameron is 52. He led the Conservative Party, modernising it, making it electable, delivering us the first Conservative majority in 23 years. And he won again in 2015 with that majority. He delivered. He had the courage to.
Well, you didn't
deliver
have a
two
majority
referendums.
in 2010, did you? You
No,
had to have a
but
have a coalition with
But
the
he
Liberal
won.
Democrats, who are
Yes.
still suffering the consequences.
But the public liked what they saw, and they gave him a majority
That's
to
true.
govern
That's true.
in Britain's national interest. But more than that, I think, look, he had the courage to deliver two referendums. First, the Scottish referendum, which he delivered, and he won to keep the union together. And he had the courage to deliver the referendum on the big question that has been asked around the country for so many years. Yes, he didn't win that question, but he had the courage to deliver it. He delivered sustainable employment generation, delivering 1,000 jobs a day. I think he's one of our greatest prime ministers. If he wishes to come back, he should be afforded every chance possible for the Conservative Party to have a say whether they would like him back or not.
Now, some people would say that having lost the Brexit referendum, he ran away and left his hapless successor, Theresa May, to pick up the pieces, which she struggled to do. What do you make of that argument?
Well, look, as much as I would have liked him to stay on and deliver Brexit and say, look, I gave the opportunity to the nation to have this say, and you've had it, and I'm not going to deliver it. He didn't do that, but I think he still did the honourable thing of putting his hand up and said, look, yes, I campaigned for Remain, and my side did not win. We lost, and I'm going to put my hand up, and I'm going to leave it for someone who will have the mandate to deliver what public have voted for. But having said that, 2 years has been a very long time in Brexit and in politics in this country, and I think he has every right. Like, for example, we've seen Sarkozy who tried to make a comeback. He won the chairmanship of the UMP and the Republicans in France. You have had, although probably not a very complimentary example, but Berlusconi in Italy, who had made umpteen comebacks.
Well, I don't think Cameron would thank you for the comparison to either, to be frank. Sarkozy is under police investigation for gigantic sums in alleged corruption, and Berlusconi is a bunga party guy, maybe maybe Cameron.
Yes, but what I'm saying
maybe
is,
Cameron would accept an
if,
invitation to one of the
if
parties,
you,
but I doubt it.
But what I'm saying is, look, if European politics has had the opportunity for leaders to make comebacks, I think in Britain, the amount of politics that has changed, it's transformed. I think, look, at 52, he has every possibility that he should be appointed.
Well, I think you put your finger on an important issue, and I said it with my colleague Dan Wooten in the talk-up to this show. When you make people Prime Minister at a very young age, you have to live with the consequences that they'll still be around for a long time after their premiership has ended. And Tony Blair is a case in point. In fact, we see as much of him today, long after he left office, as we did at the time he was in office. David Cameron, on the other hand, seemed to go gracefully into the good night, but now he's bored. Is that what politics is? A plaything? You pick it up, you put it down, you're bored, you come back?
I don't think he's bored as such. I think he has a lot to offer public service in the UK, and I think he's absolutely passionate to say, well, look, if I can contribute something, then he has every right to do so. I think this whole notion that once you have resigned and retired and gone out of the fray, that you can't come back, I think in this day and age, I think it's ludicrous. I think the best judge of David Cameron wanting to come back, first of all, is the Conservative Party membership, and then after that, it's the people.
Well, that begs a question. Presumably in 2018 or 19, as it will be, presumably before he tries this comeback, he doesn't intend to be Foreign Secretary from the House of Lords. Those days are gone. That requires him, therefore, to fight and win a seat back in the House of Commons. Do you really think that someone's going to make way for him in a safe Conservative seat? How would he get back into the House of Commons?
Well, we have Boris Johnson, who made a comeback in the House of Commons first as he was Henley-on-Thames MP. He became a very successful mayor of London, and he came back. Look, I'm sure there are Conservative associations up and down the country who would want to encourage and help someone of David Cameron's stature to come back into public life and provide some of the leadership that he so wonderfully provided this nation for as Prime Minister.
I'm genuinely surprised at the effusiveness of your praise. It's not my job to have a row with you, but he hugged a hoodie, but it didn't do anything to halt the rising level of crime in the country. He hugged a husky once. It didn't do anything to stop the depredations of climate change and environmental degradation. He introduced austerity. He brought Nick Clegg into the heart of government. None of these things are automatically going to qualify him for a triumphant comeback, I put it to you.
On the contrary, I think the bottom line is that it was him who had delivered 1,000 jobs a day, 3/4 of them full-time employment, I must say, and that is something that is putting food on people's tables, a security of a pay packet. And
well, you say a security of a pay packet, but there's 4 million people using food banks. There's millions of people on.
There are 3 million more people in jobs as we speak today.
Well, you call them jobs. A Deliveroo driver is a job. An Uber driver is a job.
Yes,
but
it is a job.
but it's
Anything...
well, you say it's a job, but it has severe consequences for everyone else. But is moreover a job on the very breadline and of the most extreme insecurity. Millions of people are on zero-hour contracts. Millions of people are at food banks. Millions of people are working, yet are so poor that they are in receipt of benefits paid for by the rest of us, subsidizing the low wages of employers. It's hardly the unalloyed record that you're alluding to.
For the first time in 10 years, George, we have had wages that are rising. We have income inequality.
Not under Cameron. Not under Cameron. They didn't rise a halfpenny.
It has been the work of Cameron and Osborne throughout the years of dealing with the deficit, with the biggest peacetime deficit that Labour left us in 2010, with dealing with a deficit that has shored up this country's finances.
How did they deal with the deficit? What's the national debt now?
Well, again, I'm afraid you're speaking again pretty much like Mr. Corbyn is. You're deflecting between the deficit and debt.
Well, we're in more debt than we were when you started.
Well, deficit, George. We have grown the economy by 17%, and the deficit is down 4/5.
Let me put this to you. Let me put something to you, Amandeep, as you're clearly an economist. Let me put this to you. The Conservative government from 2010 to 2018 have borrowed more money than any Labour government in history. Do you accept that?
Yes, and we have had to borrow that because of what Labour left us in. But again, I keep repeating to you, the deficit is what matters. We are paying down the debt. Everyday borrowing.
Well, you said you'd pay it off.
You
said you'd clear the deficit by 2015. It's 2018. It's now not going to be clear till the mid-20s.
Yes, but as I said, we have cut it by 4/5. We have cut it by 4/5, and compare that with the alternative. Mr. Corbyn, well, his basic plans are to increase the debt by another £500 billion. And when you ask John McDonnell who's going to pay for it, he says it will pay for itself.
Well, we'll talk about them another day. For the moment, we're talking about Cameron. How serious a kite do you think this is? Is it just amusing over a Courvoisier one night, or is he serious about it? You're a Conservative campaigner. You've got your ear to the ground. What do you think?
Well, I think right now, we have the Prime Minister trying to bring together a deal just like Mr. Cameron did in his negotiations pre-referendum. Let's see what she has to bring back. And, look, she's very clearly said, Mrs. May very clearly said that she got the Conservative Party into this mess. She will get us out of it. And we have to look forward to what she has to bring. But as far as David Cameron is concerned, well, look, he's a great leader that ran the Conservative Party, ran this nation. He has every right to put his name back in the fray.
Would he bring Nick Clegg back from Facebook, do you think, as his deputy?
I think Sir Nick Clegg is, forever...
by your logic, he could make a comeback too.
Well, I think he might want to go to stand in Sheffield Hallam again. I think the Labour MP there, is a pretty dodgy one.
Well, he's not here to answer that, of course, so we should move swiftly on from that. And my last question to you is this. If he was the Foreign Secretary, do you think he'd make a state visit to Libya? And if he did, with which of the four governments in Libya would he deal? With which of the three parliaments in Libya would he visit? And would he find time to visit the slave markets in today's Libya, brought about by him and Mr. Sarkozy?
Look, George, I know you are a great fan of despots and dictators. You shook hands with most of them. And I think it's a bit rich you asking this question when you know very well...
Was there anything in what I said untrue, Amandeep?
Look, we know very well where you stand on these things, George, and it's not a pretty sight. Bashar al-Assad, Mr. Gaddafi, may I ask?
I've never met Gaddafi.
You've been admirers of a lot of
and I've never met Gaddafi, and I've never admired him. So there's no need to stoop to Cameron levels of abuse. I'm trying to be.
You did meet with Bashar al-Assad, didn't you?
I'm trying to. Yes, and I'm very glad.
Well,
I'm very glad. And I'm very glad
that
I'm very glad that Bashar al-Assad has defeated ISIS and Al Qaeda in Syria. I'm very glad. I'm very glad that he has defeated Al Qaeda and ISIS in Syria when the Conservative government of David Cameron and William Hague were giving them guns and money in order to try and bring about the downfall of the secular Syrian Arab Republic. But that's a digression. My point.
Saddam Hussein?
Yeah, and I'm very glad. I'm very glad. I'm very glad.
You who shook hands with Saddam Hussein?
Yes, and I'm very glad.
You see, Saddam Hussein expelled my grandfather from Kuwait, so I've got a personal interest in this.
Well, you no doubt do. Okay. My interest wasn't personal. It was that a million people. It was that a million people might die if Bush and Blair invaded Iraq, as indeed they did die. It was my interest in bringing about an end to sanctions on Iraq that killed 560,000 children in Iraq. Do you think that was a price worth paying, Amandeep?
Do you think it's a price worth paying, supporting despots and dictators subjugate their people day in, day out?
No, I'm asking
you a question. You should answer them.
I'm not sure that it's your job to ask me questions. It's usually the interviewer that asks the questions of the guest.
Well, George, when it comes down to shaking hands with despots, I think as a citizen of this country, it's very much my job to ask a political figure at the time that question.
No, I have answered these questions a million times, and I'm happy to do so now. But my point to you is, David Cameron destroyed Libya. It now has 3 governments, 4 governments, 3 parliaments, no army, no border, and there are slaves being sold openly in slave markets. Do you think David Cameron might return?
Will you be condemning? Why don't you condemn the people who are doing it? Why don't you stand?
But they're only there because.
Why don't you stand for the West intervention to finally go and sort that mess out?
So you want the West to go back into Libya? Would David Cameron agree with that?
Well, I don't know. If you're asking me, I'm telling you. Just like it is the West that has brought in democracy into Afghanistan, who held their vote last week.
Oh my goodness! You're praying Afghanistan in aid of your David Cameron fan club. You're praying Libya. You're praying Libya in aid of your David Cameron fan club. It was David Cameron that destroyed Libya. Him and Mr. Sarkozy. And now there's 4 parliaments, 3 governments, no army, no border, and slaves being sold in the markets.
Will go out of their way to blame the West for what happens around the world. You will go out of your way to blame the West. Are you
a spokesman for the West, Amandeep?
Well, you certainly, sir, are a spokesman for the despot. I can tell you that. You're standing with the dictators.
Which dictator in question here? There's several in Libya now. There was one before. Has it been a big step forward, Libya? Has it been a success story?
It was your Labour leader, your party leader that went and sat down in a tent with Mr. Gaddafi, the dictator at the time, the man who was persecuting people left, right and centre.
Well,
right?
I take it then, I'm summarising your view fairly when I say you think Cameron's war on Libya has been a success.
What I'm saying is intervention is needed when democracy needs to be brought to people who have been subjugated by despots and dictators, by friends and people like you and Mr. Corbyn admire so much. It's a shame. It's a real shame that people like you and Mr. Corbyn admire these people so much and can't stand for what the West wants to bring to these countries for the people. They're crying out. Look at Iran. Look at Syria. Mr. Bashar al-Assad
should we invade them like we did Libya and Iraq?
No. I think the first thing that needs to be done is for them to be brought to the table on the front of the international community and said, look, this is not on. This is simply not on. But until we have people like you and Mr. Corbyn taking their side, standing with them, it's bloody difficult.
So finally, I ask you for the 3rd time, has Libya been a success?
Libya needs our support and our help in trying to rebuild itself from the depredations of the years that were Mr. Gaddafi's dictatorship.
Well, you've been a splendid spokesman for the empire, Amandeep Singh Bogal. I'm very grateful to you indeed. Well, that was spirited, just like the old days, I think. 0344 499 1000. Where do you stand? Do you stand with Amandeep Singh Bogal in the belief that David Cameron was a truly great leader and that if it wasn't for people like me and Mr. Corbyn, he would have sorted the world out and we should welcome him back with open arms? Is that your view? 0344 499 1000. If it is, your call will be prioritised. If you disagree with me on any of these matters, your call, your text, your email, your tweet will be prioritised. You can email through the website at talkradio.co.uk. You can text the word talk and then your message to 87222. But remember, that'll cost you 25p plus normal charges. You can tweet me for free at George Galloway at Talk Radio. Here's Daniel in Addleston. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hi, good evening, George. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, no, from the offset, because what you mentioned about the treatment of Irish Catholics, is that right?
Yes.
With this gentleman, this is news to me, and we obviously know there's been troubles in Ireland, but I hope more people will be informed by this and speak out about this, because that's terrible. For my part, I don't agree to that, and it's really a way to treat people. As for David Cameron, I mean, you kind of set the scene. But yeah, he the only thing he should do is go to The Hague and stand trial for war crimes for what happened in Libya, and that's the end of it. Stop giving these people oxygen. That's what should happen to him. There's no fuss or anything.
Amandeep thinks it would have been a success if it wasn't for the likes of me and Mr. Corbyn.
I know you, but the point, he proved the point of you let these people speak, and he admitted that you can borrow more money to get out of debt, but he wouldn't admit that having these slave camps and 300 warring factions and just horrors going on in that place for years. That's okay. He wouldn't admit. That's you can't answer that, but he admitted that you can borrow more money.
Yes, he thought it was a fine thing. He thought it was a fine thing that we had borrowed more money than any Labour government in all history, including the 1945 Labour government, which came to power at the end of the Second World War. That's fine. That's fine.
That's it. And again, what is this money? Is this all this Mickey Mouse money, isn't it? Derivatives and it's worthless, isn't it?
The magic money tree. They always allege that people like me think there's a magic money tree until we discovered...
It's called quantitative easing and printing money.
Well, we discovered there was at least one magic money tree
please, before you cut me off,
in the Panama Papers, Daniel. And the other magic money tree is quantitative easing. You're right.
But no, there's a gentleman, Neil Mitchell, he's from up north, Scottish gentleman, RBS GRG scandal, Neil Mitchell.
No, I don't know him, no.
No, please, I ain't making it up. He's got a website and everything. RBS GRG, that's a global restructuring group that they destroyed thousands of companies. Your mate Max Kaiser's mentioned it.
Okay.
Thousands of companies, they're getting done. Again, you go get your team to Google this.
I will do.
Neil Mitchell, and I'll get him on. He's been on Renegade Inc., on RT. So
right.
Again, I ain't making this stuff up.
No, of course not. You're not the sort of fellow who would make anything up. Daniel, thank you very much for that call, Daniel Addleston. Christina says, but bonfire night is my birthday. I like bonfires. My only understanding was that Guy Fawkes was someone who tried to blow up Parliament. I had no knowledge of the connection to a particular religion. My mother was a Catholic and my father was Protestant. Ditto, Christina. But now you know what it was all about. He didn't just take a dislike to Parliament. The persecution of Neil Lennon, this is from Martin, this is a retweet of John White's, I think, or maybe the other way around. Forgive me if I've got that wrong. Terry Eaton says, hero worship is fine, but really? David Cameron? Well, he was the parliamentary candidate in Upper Bann. And Mal says, most Northern Ireland football supporters are middle-of-the-road unionists who want players who serve their country, no matter what religion you are, to play with passion, grit and determination. Neil Lennon was one of Northern Ireland's best servants until he was hounded out by extreme loyalism. It was a disgrace, and it's now another disgrace that it has now travelled to Scotland. That's Mal in Belfast. Thanks, Mal, for that. Georgie says Scaramoron tried to appease his far-right Tories by throwing them the EU referendum bone. It went Pete Tong, so he ran off to his pig farm and left Theresa May holding the Brexit baby. I smell a general election. You might be right about that, Georgie Gull. George, we have been in deficit for 300 years since banking began, with a zero chance of ever closing it. Economics, George, economics. Brexit is coming. Sincerely, Mark, Bournemouth Brexit Battalion. We are Legion. Well, he's certainly not lost the faith. Filza says, I'm with you, Gigi, when you say you're glad that Assad defeated ISIS in Syria. Marie McFarlane, my old friend, says that Tory candidate was peddling the lie that you were speaking to Saddam Hussein rather than the people and their indefatigability. I no longer worry about these allegations and accusations. To be honest, Marie, it doesn't quite have the sting that it used to, given you state that Iraq is in today, and since the British and American invasion took place, doesn't have quite the same force, that insult. Christina says, Tories seem to think that the solution to people living under a dictatorship is to drop bombs and kill them all. How is that helping humanitarianism? It's much better to talk than kill. Tories don't care about the loss of innocent lives in war. And Adam Gary said, very amused by your last guest. I suppose the writer of Ceausescu's last speech has a new job with the Bring Back Cameron campaign. Different ideology, same ridiculous desperation. And that was before he metamorphosed into Christopher Hitchens. Peter in Glasgow says, Amandeep is confused. We never had bombers killing our kids in Manchester when Gaddafi was in power. And Chris says, I could not agree with your guess less. It's not up to the West to impose democracy on anyone. And who do we think we are to do this? Says Chris. Amandeep appointed himself a spokesman for the West and a spokesman for the Empire. The Boss, one of Bruce Springsteen's greatest songs from, in my opinion, his greatest album. That's Into the Fire, was written for the firefighters who plunged into the fire on 9/11/2001. A little bird just dropped in my lap, the election result in Upper Bann. I think I should read it. First, and elected, was David Simpson of the Democratic Unionist Party, who polled 15,430 votes. Second was the Ulster Unionist Party, Joanne Dobson, who polled 13,166. Third was Catherine Seeley of Sinn Féin, who polled 11,593. Fourth was the SDLP, Dolores Kelly, who polled 4,238. Fifth was the Alliance candidate, Peter Lavery, who polled 1,780. Sixth was Sister, Martin Kelly, who polled 460. Seventh was the Workers' Party, Damien Hart, who polled 351. And last, but by no means least, was Amandeep Singh Bogal for the Northern Ireland Conservatives, who polled 201 votes. He's got a big future ahead of him, that lad, I'd say. Here's Alan Nathan, who is from Main Street Radio, who is a centrist politically, he says, a Trump fan, I'm told. Who better to join swords with on the great caravan that's headed to the border? Alan, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight.
Well, George Galloway, good to chat with you again. How are you today?
And you, it's been a long time. Alan, is it a masterstroke by Trump to have the whole country looking over there, in this case there being the border, where an arguably scarcely existent caravan of people are weeks away from reaching the United States, maybe months away? Is it a masterstroke electorally?
It may be. It also perhaps is rooted in some veracity, some perspective. We have about 400,000 people who violate the entry laws into our homeland. I'm somebody who would like to see an acceleration of pathways to citizenship, but I think it's nonsensical to do such a thing until after we've secured the border. I find it silly that all nations around the world are allowed to control their borders without fear, the xenophobia card being thrown at them, but for some reason here in the States, we're chastised. I think I think most with an IQ above dandruff know that it's okay. You can criticize the actions and comments of a person or people without being bigoted against those people and their ethnic or racial origin. I think universal compliance with the law is actually a marvelous thing.
It would be a marvelous thing. We'd all love to see it, Alan. First of all, let's start off with what we agree on. A state which doesn't have a border isn't a state at all.
You're pretty much a continuation of the contiguous state to which you're attached.
Yeah, the state has a right to defend its border against people who wish to enter the state without the proper permission to do so. I'm with you on that. But
Hello.
Are you really saying, Alan, that...
I'm sorry, George, you broke... George, I'm so sorry. You broke up a bit and I missed what you said.
I was just saying that I agree with you. Every state needs a border. Every state has a right to defend that border, and no state can be asked to allow anyone to cross its border without the necessary permissions to do so. I agree with you on all of that. But are you really saying that this has nothing to do with the elections on Tuesday?
I'm saying it may, but there's an old phrase that good policy makes for good politics. Therefore, conversely, I guess bad policy would make for bad politics. And I think Bill Clinton said it best, that when you find something that works politically and you also happen to believe in it, just because it has great efficacy and drives your opponents nuts, doesn't mean you should cease and desist. I mean, go ahead and use it all the way.
Fair enough. The point, though, I'm trying to make is that by overreacting in the way that he has, by sending all these thousands of soldiers to the border, these are very expensive soldiers. They cost the taxpayer a lot of money. To deal with, I don't know, a few hundred, a couple of thousand ragged travellers who are many weeks, maybe months away from reaching the border, to do so at this time is blatant electioneering and scraping of the barrel of xenophobia, the word you yourself used. He could have quietly turned these people away at the border. But by doing what he's doing, it's my point to you that he's creating an atmosphere in the United States of racialized division, which is beginning to cost your country dearly in these horrific crimes that are taking place.
Well, I would disagree. I would say that really that's just sort of a preposition masquerading as grounds for really a subsequent claim that otherwise has no grounds. I think we have to understand that, people, there's a difference between issues relevant to racial conflict versus issues relevant to conflict that just transpires between people who are not of the same race. In other words, a black guy and a white guy can argue over the same things as might be argued by two blacks, two Hispanics, two Asians, two Middle Easterners. But for some reason, if the discussion involves a disagreement between people who are perhaps not of the same demographic, then bingo bango, it's easy to artificially assert racial conflict when in fact there is none.
Well, there was racial conflict involved in someone from the far right taking heavy arms into a synagogue and murdering a significant number of people. That was racialized conflict.
Yes, and that person who pulled that off despised Trump because he thought he was too cozy to Jews, and yet you have this masturbated sophistry surrounding our media asserting that Trump is in fact anti-Semitic, when in fact his daughter is a converted Jew, his son-in-law is Jewish, his grandchildren are Jewish, and unlike any of his predecessors, when he made the promise to move our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, unlike Barack Obama, unlike Bill Clinton, unlike George W. Bush, he actually did it. He didn't take advantage of a waiver that gave him an out to not do it. He did it. And he has shown this propensity for fulfilling promises to a much greater extent than any of his predecessors. And please understand, George, I really can out-left the best of them. Yes, I'll agree with conservatives in that I'm for smaller government, lower taxes, originalist judges, in other words, people who believe that the Constitution actually has standards. But at the same time, I'm a social progressive, pro-choice, pro-gay rights, pro-gay marriage, pro-social safety net. Hell, I'm pro-reparations for blacks. But I look at this discussion surrounding Trump and this horrific monster, this Robert Bowers, who thought he could just take it upon himself and slaughter 11 innocents. And I see people trying to conflate what happened and this anti-Semitic monster with somehow being driven by Trump's own anti-Semitism.
Well, no, what I'm saying is these things are being driven by the heightened atmosphere of racialized division. Let's take the guy then who had Trump's
Where's the connectivity,
picture.
George?
Well, let me give you one.
Okay.
A guy drives a van around his home area, festooned in Donald Trump memorabilia, pictures of Trump's enemies and so on. And he allegedly sends explosive devices through the mail, great risk to everyone who handled that mail.
Dud bombs. Dud pipe bombs, each and every one, yes.
Yeah, to a wide range of Trump's enemies. This kind of thing is coming out of the atmosphere that Trump is creating, surely.
Well, that makes no sense because I don't recall that same sort of animus being thrown at Bernie Sanders when we had James Hodgkinson go out to a Republican baseball practice last year and attempt to shoot out everybody. And unlike the dud bombs, those bullets landed in people, almost took out Congressman Steve Scalise.
Unfortunately, Alan,
I don't recall any person saying that Bernie Sanders was guilty of heightening racism.
You've made that point, and very well. It's been a pleasure to disagree with you. The clock waits for no man, and now it's time for a break. On the eve of Guy Fawkes and the midterm elections, and the movie poster you've just been hearing about, which seems to portend fireworks between the United States and Iran, I've been trying to make a different point. I don't like Guy Fawkes Night because it celebrates the hanging, drawing and quartering and then incineration of the parts of, if I've got that right, one Guido Fawkes, who did, it's true, try to blow up the aristocratic Parliament of 1605, the unelected Parliament of 1605, that was presiding over a reign of terror against Roman Catholics like me in Britain at that time. And therefore to celebrate it by throwing a guy on the flames is not something that would be done if the victim, in this case Guy Fawkes, was not a Catholic. If he was a Jew or a Muslim, it wouldn't still be happening. It would have been banished like blackface and the black and white minstrel show and gollywogs to the trash can of history. That's my take. But Nick Holland knows far more about this subject than me. He is the author of The Real Guy Fawkes, and he joins me now. Nick, thanks very much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me on, George. Thanks for having me on your great show.
Tell us, who is the real Guy Fawkes?
Well, the Guy Fawkes is an enigma, for a start. It depends which side of the argument you're on. I must say, to start with, I agree with what you say about we shouldn't be celebrating bonfires. We shouldn't be celebrating Guy Fawkes not by throwing guys onto a bonfire. That is a terrible way to remember what was a really tragic, violent event. But Guy Fawkes, was he a freedom fighter? Was he a religious fanatic, or was he a terrorist? It depends which side of the argument you come from. And in 1605, that was Catholic or Protestant. It was rigidly divided between those two camps.
Exactly so. And at that time, I'm right, amn't I, that there was a reign of terror against Roman Catholics in the state.
There really was.
Please describe it, would you?
Yeah, I mean, like yourself, I'm from a Roman Catholic background, and we have freedom to practice today, which people in 1605 and in the late 16th century couldn't have dreamed of. To be Catholic in those days, especially if you were, quite a wealthy Catholic, meant that you risked being fined if you didn't attend Church of England services. You risked having your property taken. If you were harbouring a Catholic priest, you could be arrested, hung, drawn and quartered, tortured, simply for refusing to acknowledge the Church of England. And it was a reign of terror, really, I think, for a lot of Catholics in those days.
And refuseniks had to go to Mass in the woods and risk their lives by doing so.
They did, either hidden masses in the same place like the Woods, or some people, some brave people, especially some of the gentry, some of the Catholic gentry, hid priests in priest halls in their mansions and homes and had secret masses in their houses. But if they were discovered, as many were, it was death to them, and their lands would be forfeited. Their children would be disinherited. It shows the strength of their faith, really, that they were prepared to do it when they risked so much. But then some people, like Guy Fawkes, and like Robert Catesby, who led the conspiracy, they just had enough by 1605, and they thought, we've got to fight back.
And who could blame them, hearing you and hearing what I'm saying? Who could blame British Catholics from seeking to strike back at a state that was persecuting them at best and murdering them at worst?
Well, that's right. I mean, to be fair, a lot of Catholics obviously didn't take that point of view. They tried to muddle by, but they found themselves getting poorer and poorer, and they could see relatives or people of their faith being arrested and executed. But yes, I think it's got real resonance for today, hasn't it? That if you back people into a corner, if you deny them their rights and say, you can't have a voice, you can't follow your beliefs, some people aren't going to take it, and they'll try to fight back.
Indeed so. And all this time, since then till now, people have been building bonfires. They often, by the way, in the north of Ireland, for example, have an explicitly sectarian purpose. All kinds of effigies are burned on them. All kinds of vile things are hung on banners from the side of them. I mentioned at the beginning of the show, if you missed it, that in Lewis, whilst they pride themselves nowadays on choosing a villain of the day and burning his or her effigy, in the recent past, they burned effigies of the current Pope, for example. Ian Paisley went to Lewis precisely for that reason, to congratulate them implicitly for their sectarian bonfires. This has gone on now for centuries, and I bet that hardly anyone who's planning to go to a bonfire this weekend, an organised one, I hope, with organised fireworks for safety reasons, I bet hardly any of them know the subject we're talking about tonight.
You're right. I mean, fireworks night, as it's called now, fireworks weekend, it seems to go on for days on end. A lot of people see it as having fun, watching fireworks going off. That's fine. But as you say, people don't know the history of it. I think Guy Fawkes and the conspirators are in danger of being airbrushed from history, because it's a subject that makes people think. Are people being treated fairly today, for example? And like you say, I think sectarianism is still here. It's very.
Well, ask Neil Lennon. Ask Neil Lennon if it's still there.
Yeah, exactly. It's a disgrace that sort of thing's still going on, and the adults who ostensibly sensible adults, or at least they'd think they were, can throw coins at people because of their faith and sing vile songs, which, that's the sort of...
Well, there was an effigy of Neil Lennon outside the ground with a rope round his neck, hanging from a scaffold.
The people who do that sort of act, that really is criminal, and they should be brought to book.
Well, I mean, I think that the education system should honestly tell the story of what happened and why it happened. And people can still have bonfires, they can still have fireworks, but they should desist from throwing the guy on the flames. Do you agree with me on that?
Well, I certainly do. I mean, as you say, there are modern effigies. I see Boris Johnson's at one bonfire, but I won't comment on that. But you're right. I certainly don't think there's room for guys on the bonfire, especially when people don't know the background story. The people who think they do know the story would simply say, he tried to blow up Parliament, he's a terrorist. And I say, yes, he did try to blow up Parliament. That would have led to a massive loss of life, but they don't know why he was trying to do it, or how he'd been pushed into what he thought was the only way to go.
How do I get your book, Nick? I really would like to read it. Where is it available, in the shops or on Amazon?
It is, thank you, George. Yes, you can get it on Amazon. Look, Nick Holland, The Real Guy Fawkes. or in your local bookshop, hopefully, or they can order it. But people really.
Who's the
like
publisher?
I'm glad.
Who's the publisher?
Pen and Sword books. Do lots of great history books, but
great name.
I think it's an important story.
Great name. The pen is mightier, of course, than the sword.
It certainly is. I hope so.
More power to your pen. Nick Holland, author of The Real Guy Fawkes. Now do you see what I'm talking about? You see, most of you thought I was just being a killjoy. I'll warrant. But that is what I was talking about. 0344 499 1000.
And it burns.
What clever people I've got working with me. Wonderful music tonight. Johnny Cash, Ring of Fire. Do you see what I did there? 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. Tommy in Oxfordshire has. That's why he's up next. Tommy, welcome.
Thank you, George. Nice to talk to you.
And you, sir. Go ahead. What would you like to say?
George, sectarianism. When I was 16 in 1978, I did a boxing show for a local copper. Remember, we used to have them walking around in them days.
In those days, yeah. Hello.
Well, he was running a boxing show and he was one person short. And as a favour, he returned it, knocked my door and sent me around to the local building site, which was renovating our housing estate at the time, and says, come round, there's a job going. And I went round and they asked me what school I went to, and obviously something or other. And then it was...
That's always a giveaway.
I know, and then it was, you bead rat on little bee, you know, that. And I got the job, by the way. And I was there for 20 years. What goes around comes around. 17 years later, the mob that ran it were all from Larkhall, need I say anymore?
Not much.
And they all got sacked for fraud for building houses using materials and labour from sites and stuff. And then I hear that MP guy coming on from Ireland, and he's talking about, you know...
Well, he's not yet an MP. He only got 201 votes, and he came last.
Yeah.
He came last. He's very much trying to be one.
He's talking about stopping people being exploited in Libya or whatever. You know, what about them being exploited here? What about these single mothers that can't pay their rent and getting their kids taken off them?
Well, we have been talking about that this evening. It's a good one. I wrote a book on the. I wrote a book on the.
I'm very worried.
Yeah, I wrote a book on the Neil Lennon affair at a time when his life was literally in danger. And now I hear on the radio, just 5 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, I hear that Neil is considering leaving Scotland again because of the racist sectarian hatred to which he is remorselessly subject.
It was very much the same the other side when Maurice Johnson signed for Rangers. It was very much the same. He had the same problems, didn't he?
I don't know about that, but what I know about Lennon is...
I'm very worried about this universal credit thing, because I've now got Parkinson's disease and other neurological disorders. And then I hear they're rolling it all into one, and I could be £50 a week worse off or something. Great.
The minister hopes not. That'll reassure you. Tommy, thanks for your call. I appreciate it very much. Frank is in Dumbarton. Go ahead, Frank.
Hi, George. How are you doing?
Good, sir. Good. Are you there? Oh, my goodness, we lost Frank. Let's get him back. David Leviscont says the demons control everything, and we only know one reality. Who's going to make the change? Frank's back on the line from Dumbarton. Welcome, Frank.
George.
Yeah, go on.
Hi, George.
Go on, sir.
George, it's just on the Neil Lennon subject.
Yes.
It's just... it's not just about... Did you see this anti-Irish Catholic up here? It's always been anti-Catholic, George. It's not anti-Irish Catholic.
Yeah, but most of us are most of us are Irish Catholics in Scotland.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah.
90%, 95%. So that's why I think Neil's right. Neil's right when he calls it racism, because it's not just anti-Catholicism; it's anti-Irish racism, and it's Scotland's shame, Frank, and it hasn't gone away. You've only got to look. I've been looking at my Twitter feed and the other hashtags to follow what people are saying. And there's a deluge of people blaming Neil Lennon. I even had one on my own show, Patrick, of all names, on my own show, saying that he dived.
Gary Caldwell says it as well.
He done a dive.
I know, it's a joke, George. You see them hitting in the face. But George, you're not mentioning people. There's 3 people went to prison as well for what they've done to Neil Lennon.
Yeah, the people were sending him explosive devices. They were sending him bullets.
People know that.
They were assaulting him. He's now been assaulted twice at Tynecastle.
He was knocked out cold in Glasgow. The 2 guys they sent to jail.
Yeah. Now, I mean, to blame the victim for that tells you everything you need to know. The idea that Scotland is some multicultural contrast to racist England is the farthest thing from the truth. It's a Brigadoon, Scotch mist-shrouded myth.
Up here, the media won't call it out for what it is. They try to dress it up and say they try to keep balance. They say that, it's not like one's as bad as the other. They only call it out for what it is. They always dress up and try to find some kind of balance.
Well, it's very, very bad, very depressing. Frank in Dumbarton, thanks for your call, pal. Marie McFarlane says, proved with that last caller, a Tory candidate who slandered Galloway and Corbyn on air. We need to hear the ranting of far-right Tories. They are too careful to do this in the MSM, but are panting to attack GG on talk radio. They reveal their hatred emotionally. And Bob Justice, my old friend, says, neoliberals do like to do the deficit dance. They're referring to the amount of borrowing which takes place each year. But do they apply compound interest to the truth? Because the fact remains, the size of the debt and the rate at which it has inflated has ballooned. And Lizzie says, thank God the Irish recognised a blinkered borderline Egypt when they saw one. This is... I'm a deep loser. And Marie says, the Trump fan on talk radio talking to Galloway about the Mexican caravan and how Homeland Security is needed to keep out these immigrants was a treat. John says, what do you think Dr. Finlay and Dr. Snoddy will say about his sudden return of Dr. Cameron? Dr. Cameron. I better not say that. I've got a great Dr. Cameron joke, but I better not say it. Sanitize it for me, someone. Tommy in County Tyrone says, good evening, George. Great show as always. Although I think you've been a bit more reserved in your opinions this last few weeks. I mean this in a nice way. Listen, that man, Amandeep, got 201 votes when he stood in 2015. Says it all, really. I was waiting for you to tear him apart on foreign policies of David Cameron, as I think his main aim was just to get on to have a go at you. Stay safe, my friend. Thank you, Tommy. I do have to be a bit more circumspect these days on the radio, but not on my other platforms, so you can catch up on the uncircumspect me as well. Mal says, America has 7 million unfulfilled job vacancies, many of which its citizens won't fulfill. Trump is supposedly a businessman who wants to make America great again. America needs migrants like themselves to do these jobs. Surely that would grow the American economy further. Call a proper businessman, Donald. That's from Mal in Belfast. It is ironic, as Trump himself is the child of immigrants, one of them Scottish. The legend, that is Lizzie in Gloucester, is up next. Go ahead, Lizzie.
Hi, George.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Oh, we were all champing at the bit for you to start having a real go at that Tory from Ireland.
I'm not allowed to do that nowadays.
Oh, I know.
I've got to do it more forensically.
Oh, yes, I suppose. And as long as you stand up and state the facts, then it doesn't really matter what he says. It's all just white
oftentimes,
noise.
if you give people enough rope and all that,
he did hang himself, didn't he?
I didn't want to make that metaphor explicit, but yes.
Well, that brings us on nicely to the subject in discussion tonight, Guy Fawkes.
Yes.
I tweeted, I hope that you don't ring me back and ask my opinion on Guy Fawkes, because I just feel like such a know-nothing compared to Nick Holland.
He was good, wasn't he?
Yes.
He was a great guest. I'm looking forward to reading that book.
And I suppose he knows everything about it. And you have the experience, because you're Catholic, you know the history of it. And the only reason I know the history of it is because my father's family are Mormon. So I was brought up Mormon.
Okay.
And I wondered why, apart from everything else that we didn't celebrate November the 5th, or 4th, the night of the 4th. Mm. And I was told it was because it was persecution of a religion which we wouldn't partake in.
How fascinating is that? I never knew that.
Yeah. So,
well, I mean, that's brownie points for the Mormons, and I don't often say that. Because that's what was happening. Now,
actually, very kind people, Mormons, very kind.
If you attempt to destroy a faith, criminalize its adherents, persecute them, kill their priesthood, what do you expect except revolution?
Really, yes.
And we're not talking, I mean, when the people say, he tried to blow up Parliament, it was a Parliament of hand-picked by the king. It was nobles, dukes. It wasn't the elected member of Parliament for Gloucester.
No,
and that Parliament was instrumental in this reign of anti-Catholic terror. So why would you expect... Of course, there were a lot of Catholics who took Jesus at his word and turned the other cheek, only to have it sliced off.
Yeah.
But you'll always get a minority of people in a persecuted religion or group who will say, I'd rather be martyred, I'd rather be dead than to live like this.
Well, that's right. And when you think about it, I mean, to us activists today, we think, oh, great, he tried to blow up Parliament, we're all on Guy Fawkes' side. Not even knowing the background of it or the reason why he felt drawn to do that. And, you know, they started lighting the bonfires as on the anniversary of that date, because to let them know that the plot had failed.
Yes.
And then they used to burn the Pope, didn't they?
Yes, in living memory. In Lewis, they burned the Pope.
Yeah, mad. Anyway.
That's why Paisley went there.
Yes.
Unbelievable. I only learned that tonight. I've learned a lot tonight, Lizzie, and I always learn from you. That was a great story about the Mormons. I really appreciate that. Tony is in Goole in East Yorkshire. Tony, welcome, mate.
Hiya, George. Can you hear me clear enough?
Yeah, very clearly, pal. Very clearly.
Cheers, George. I've rung you several times before, and although I have different political opinions to you, I've always respectfully agreed with you.
Thank you.
Tonight, I'm going to take a chance and take you on, and I know I'm going to get ripped apart. But
no, you're not. I'm not allowed to rip people apart now.
No, you're all right, George. I was listening to the conversation you had with Mr. Singh about David Cameron.
Yes.
And stop me if I'm incorrect, but one of the things I got a bit agitated with you was the conversation went on about, the legacy of David Cameron with the food banks.
Yes.
Is that...
Yes,
yeah.
Well, he introduced austerity with all its consequences, one of which is a fantastic growth in food banks.
Okay, well, can I just throw the coin on the other side?
Yeah.
As a market trader, I work in Yorkshire, and I work with a lot of people on the market. A lot of my customers are poor people, and I hear day in, day out, about food banks, and I hear this on a daily basis. But what I do when I listen to these customers, and I talk to my customers, they can't afford to buy a pair of shoes half the time, and they can't afford to buy food. The problem, on top of the low wages, and the biggest problem they tell me, is nothing to do with David Cameron or Mr. Corbyn or John Major or Margaret Thatcher or Tony Blair. It's the problem of all governments. It's that nobody holds the landlords to accountability with the excessive rent, because most people that are going to food banks, not all, but most, paying rent.
Mm-hmm.
And rent in properties is probably 2, 3, sometimes 4 times more than people with mortgages. And the thing that makes my stomach sick as a decent person of a social conscience is some of my fellow colleagues on the market are landlords, and they vote Labour, and they vote Tory, and they vote Liberal. And they think it's quite funny, hilarious, over the last 20, 30 years when they bought cheap properties to put people in who are English, immigrants, people that work hard in factories on low wages, and they charge exorbitant fees. And no government over the last 20 years, including Mr Cameron, including Mr Blair, and in the Labour Party manifesto under Mr Corbyn, have got a ceiling limit how they're going to tackle rent. And the problem with food banks in a lot of cases is that people can't afford it because of the exorbitant rent fees.
Well, I'm not going to tear you apart on that.
I thought that was a balance for you.
Yeah, I'm not going to tear you apart on that because I agree with that in every particular. It's a pleasure to agree with you, Tony, in Goole. Get your calls in. We're running out of time. 0344 499 1000. Here's Raymond in Bedfordshire. Raymond, welcome.
George, hello, it's nice to talk to you. Especially, George, as your mother's from Waterford.
That's right, yes. That's right.
Yeah, George, I've lived in this country for 40 years, around Kilburn, Crickwood, and these places, a working man on the building site.
Yes.
And I've been listening to your programme about what's happening in Scotland, which obviously is very disappointing for you, what's going on with Neil Lennon.
Yes.
But there's also a vilification of a man in England, in all the media outlets, a certain James McLean.
Every year, like, there's only 3 things certain: death, taxes, and the attacks on James McLean.
Yeah. And for your listeners, James McLean is a man from Derry City in Northern Ireland who refuses to wear a poppy because the British Army marched into Derry and murdered. He's committed murders in his community, and he's vilified for it every year, as you say. But people should realise that the poppy, plenty of Irishmen, George, served in the First World War, in the Second World War. The Irish came here long before the Windrush generation. We saw how they've been treated and basically built this country from the ground up, George. And this is the way they're treated.
Well, I agree with that in every particular. To ask James McLean from Derry to wear a poppy for the British war effort, to celebrate British arms, when the parachute regiment indisputably murdered 14 Derry citizens in cold blood on Bloody Sunday, he would need his head examined.
I watched the telly, George, a couple of weeks ago. I think it was a programme about Ballymurphy, to carry on what went on there.
Ballymurphy was the same regiment. Mass murder on the streets of Ballymurphy.
On Irish soil by British soldiers.
Yeah.
So people in this country, we don't want to be handing out history lessons. We'd like to move on. But there's no respect for people in this country. We've seen what's happened to the Windrush generation under these Tories. People having to go in and take DNA tests. Unbelievable stuff.
Yeah, although that started under Gordon Brown, it's worth pointing out. Anyway, Raymond, it's been lovely to talk to you, my friend. Let me go to Sean Caden, all the way down under in Australia. My old pal, Sean, how are you?
Very well, George. Hope you're keeping well, you and the family.
Excellent. All good here. All good. But missing you. What would you like to say?
No, it's just a couple of points, George. I think that it's very worrying when someone gets hit with a coin on the side of the head.
Could have been worse. Could have knocked his eye out, yeah?
Absolutely. People trying to blame him for that. I think that, fingers crossed, hopefully, and I won't hold my breath, but hopefully this might be a sort of line in the sand here because, he's a man with a family. He's got a wife and kids. And this, I can't imagine. Yeah. A lot of people say he's got the hide of a rhinoceros, but he's a human being, and he's got a wife and kids, and it's just unacceptable, totally unacceptable. And
you say a line in the sand. I doubt it. I said in my book on Neil Lennon that this was a moment where Scotland should have died of shame, but it didn't. And it won't die of shame judging by the Twitter feed I've seen tonight about this second occasion. And I understand he was also assaulted after his press conference. I think he's going to chuck it. Even though he's doing really well at Hibs, he's much loved by the Hibernian support and by the players. I think he's going to chuck it. And yet you've still got people who pretend on social media that Scotland should be a separate state because it is a cut above the rest of this island. And it's just not true.
Well, just in regards to your previous interview as well, George, I forget exactly which house it was, but I was on a tour of one of the old homes, stately home type things.
Yes.
And I had the privilege and honour to see like a priest hall and actually a secret tunnel that the priests used to come through. And
this is where wealthy people hid priests at the risk of their own execution, hanged, drawn and quartered, and the priest's execution.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree with you more in terms of people's education on this should be a subject in school because
but it's not. It's really not. I've looked at the history books in the school, and they don't contextualise the 5th of November plot at all.
Absolutely.
Sean, lovely to hear your voice again, I must say. Let me pass on to the legend that is Damien in Brighton.
Good evening, George.
Good evening, Damien.
George, I wasn't planning on calling you this evening.
Well, we've missed you this last few weeks.
I have been a bit busy. But I wasn't going to call, George, but I felt compelled to because of some of the comments made by your Conservative guest earlier this evening.
Ah, yes, the candidate for Upper Ban.
Yes. There was a couple of sort of minor points I wanted to pick up on, and a main one, if I may. Now, he boasted that the Tories have achieved 17% growth. When you consider that's over an 8-year period, that's not much of a boast, really, George, is it?
That's not bad.
He also talked about there being 2 million more people employed. Now, firstly, I think it's slightly worrying that 2 million new workers don't seem to be making much of an impact on the country's growth figures. But I think a more important statistic, George, which isn't discussed at all, is the fact that almost 50% of people, workers in the UK, earn less than £20,000 a year gross. Now, that's a low-wage economy.
So it's low pay, insecure employment, 0 hours employment, increasing reliance on food banks. Some people can't see what things are like around them. Don't you find that?
I do, George. I think that the cuts are starting to, make people aware of that. But the main claim I wanted to challenge that he made, George, was that he claimed that Labour left the public finances in a poor state in 2010. Now, that's a very popular Conservative talking point that has been generally accepted to be true, and it's not, because what actually happened, I think, in the financial sector crisis of 2008, the result of that was UK GDP dropped by almost 5%, and the Labour government stepped in and pumped in £154 billion into the economy to offset for the economic inactivity. And that worked, George, because within 2 years of the crisis, the biggest financial crisis since the Great Depression, Labour delivered 1.7% growth. Now, my point is this, George. In the budget speech this week of Philip Hammond, he's projected less growth each year for the next 3 years. Now, the Labour plan of investment was working. The Tories and Liberal Democrats introduced austerity. They turned off the taps just when the economy needed that extra boost. And that is the long-term price that we're, apart from obviously the human impact on people being affected by the underfunding of the NHS.
Okay.
But that's my point, George.
It's a good one and well made, as always. Damien in Brighton. Let's take a quick break. If I did the lottery and if I won the lottery, I'd buy myself a radio station and I'd call it Radio Nowhere. And that Bruce Springsteen track would be my signature tune. Well, you wait ages for a legend, and then they all come along at once. Here's the legend that is Norma in Bristol.
George, I've had a very bad cough, and now I've got a very funny voice.
No, it's like honey. It's like honey on beautiful round stones.
Oh, you
trickling.
are a charmer. I think I mentioned it about a year ago, but I am going to mention it again because I do worry about the poppies. Obviously, we have to celebrate Armistice Day, but 10 days before, everybody wears a poppy, and I think it's a bit over the top. Now,
they wear them ever longer, and they are ever larger, and ever more compulsory.
I know, but the thing I'm trying to do is, you see, in the budget, they produce more money to go for the enlargement of Trident. Now, if we actually ever used Trident,
that would be the end of the world.
We wouldn't even have an actual Armistice Day, and even Jeremy Corbyn.
It would be doomsday.
Well, it would, and even Jeremy Corbyn's, some of the Labour MPs, they don't agree with the non-proliferation, and I do think there should be a little bit of a parallel, whereby.
Don't forget, it was a Labour government that first introduced nuclear weapons in Britain.
Pardon?
It was a Labour government that brought nuclear weapons to Britain.
Well, yeah, may well be. But on the other hand, I do think people should think a little bit more about the past and the future and just make a little bit of a thought to say, let's stop this. It's the actual.
Well, I wouldn't mind it if the waxen-faced hypocrites at the cenotaph were not plotting future wars as they stood there commemorating the fallen in previous wars.
Yeah, I know, and it does worry me, but I do, realise that you do have to say these things.
Of course,
and you have to go along.
I donate to the British Legion every year. I bow my head at the moment of remembrance, but I won't wear a poppy now because it has been taken over by the war industry. The political and military-industrial complex is out of control in this country.
I know. So I hope you agree with me a little bit about the non-proliferation of these nuclear weapons.
I totally do. Let me rest your voice and try and squeeze in another caller. Thank you, Norma. This is Kevin in Fulham. Go ahead, Kevin.
I'm in Feltham, not Fulham, but never mind.
No, it's my glasses. I need stronger ones. It does say Feltham. Fulham would be nice, though.
Yeah.
Fulham would be nice,
Fulham.
Kev.
No planes. Anyway, Guy Fawkes.
Yes.
Are you sure they burnt him?
No, they hanged, drawn and quartered him, but they threw his parts on a fire.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Anyway, it was just the Protestants turned to persecute the Catholics. It was just whoever was in power. It was their turn to persecute at the time. The Catholics persecuted the Protestants when they were in power, and vice versa.
Well, I fully accept that. Anyone who knows the history of the Spanish Inquisition knows the cruelties of the medieval Catholic Church. But in the case we're talking about, for what is that now? Well over 4 centuries, we have been celebrating the awful execution of a man who was taking action, armed action, against a reign of terror against his co-religionists. And I don't think we should do it. And we wouldn't do it in 2018 if the guy they were tossing on the flames was a Muslim or was a Jew. They wouldn't do it.
No, but there was plenty of persecution during the Crusade.
But we're not celebrating that every 5th of November. You're obfuscating, Kevin, if I may say so, because none of that persecution is being celebrated every year. Every year.
But why? Well, why is this particular one celebrated?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's my question.
Well,
that's my question. Why are we celebrating what actually was an incident that we should be ashamed of? Have I done you, Kevin?
Well, no. It's evolved. It's evolved over. I don't know why, but it's evolved over the years.
Yeah,
It started off.
and I don't like it.
Started off as just.
I don't like it.
ringing
But I don't like it. I feel I feel attacked by it.
Well, I don't feel attacked by it, but I mean that's the way you feel. But I mean, you could argue it's like Halloween. I don't like the way Halloween's turned out. I mean, it was a pagan celebration.
That movie. Who was it that was in that movie? That Halloween.
What, Halloween?
Yeah.
What? Which one? Jamie Lee Curtis?
Yeah, Jamie Lee. She's responsible for this Americanization of Halloween. I mean, Halloween used to be quite an innocent time. Now we've got top bosses at ITV turning up at parties dressed as Saudi executioners with severed heads in their hands.
Maybe slightly bad taste, but it's Jonathan Ross's party. It was a bit of a joke, but maybe a slightly bad taste. But
pretty bad. No, I'm not. I'm not a fan of today's Halloween.
No.
But anyway,
No,
Kevin, it's been a pleasure.
am I.
It's been a pleasure disagreeing with you. Thanks for your call. Charlie is in Durness. Go ahead, Charlie.
And Kouros.
Oh, you're in
Anyway,
Kouros. Aye, okay.
Yeah, aye. But anyway,
You're an SNP man. I remember you.
Yes. Well, I'm an independence man at the end of the day. But
Okay.
there's a couple of things, George. We normally agree on most things, but obviously when it comes to Scotland, we usually disagree.
Yeah.
A couple of things. A few weeks ago, there was one thing or a few things that annoyed me. Where you're going through the media, sort of taking the mickey out of the Scots, for marching with kilts and whatnot, which was kind of annoying, kind of patronising. But anyway, that's that. We'll forget about that. It's tonight with the Neil Lennon, the unfortunate case with Neil Lennon, to suggest that, this proves that Scotland is maybe just as racist as England is, quite frankly, ludicrous. You know yourself that it's a minority, a tiny minority in Scotland. That,
yeah.
Well, and even the
I've got to correct you if you say I know myself, because I know myself that it's not a tiny minority. You're entitled to feel that, and you express your view. Go ahead, but don't put words in my mouth, Charlie.
Okay, no bother. Even the two clubs in question, two big clubs in Scotland, who have got it's a minority in these clubs as well. I mean, it's not like a majority in these clubs where they have these thoughts on Catholics or even if you look at what happened at Dens Park last week, which was kind of ridiculous as well, with the chanting coming from the away end regarding the poppy and where to stick it, which I thought was very distasteful. But of course, they've got their reasons for thinking that.
It is distasteful, but it's political. It's not sectarian.
Yeah.
That's the difference. You see, when people sing that they're wading up to their knees in my blood, that's sectarian. That's hatred, not of a political thing, but of a religious thing. That's the difference, Charlie.
Yeah.
Celtic supporters, many of them, have a political take on the British presence, occupation of 6 counties in Ireland and its former occupation of the whole of Ireland. That's a political thing. And Wolfe Tone, the leader of the United Irish Men, who started the Republican movement, was a Protestant. Charlie, thanks. Sorry we don't have longer to debate these things because we've run out of time. And I want to read a couple of tweets because we didn't get through all that many. David Leviscott says, we've been sold a lie, and if we don't take it back, there's no future for anyone. Who cares for you? We need to care for each other. And Martin Bridgewater says, Guy Fawkes, possibly the last honest man to enter the Houses of Parliament with honest intentions. No, I was pretty honest about my intentions. So is one or two people. Hi, George. We're pleased to know our guy at our bonfires is given the best seat in the garden and has not been burnt. More celebrated from Flower Power. How very nice. Flower Power Bonfire Night. This one is from Adam Hathaway. It says, cracks me up every time. No, that doesn't make any sense on its own. Phil Nielsen says the Nigerian army uses Trump's words to justify the fatal shooting of rock-throwing protesters. One reason that buffoon is a danger to the world. Apologies to all the tweets that I didn't get to reach and all the callers that were disappointed. It's been a busy show, an unexpectedly busy show tonight.